I am getting some feedback. 1 minute. There we go. Okay. That's the second time I've done that. Fantastic. Third time's a charm. Come back for whatever is third. Okay. Back to where we were. So I went to All Things Open last year, and I met with a bunch of different great people. And in speaking to a bunch of different people, um, decided that we should get out in early January and talk a little bit about what's happening in open source because there's so many good things. And my whole idea was that I wanted to make sure that there was, when we're all getting sort of ramped up to go back to work, I guess we should be working, but ramped up to go back to work, that we have a little time to, take in some new information, do our own resolutions for 2026. And open source is a great place to put some of your action and intensity and passion. And so we are going to use this hour or so to talk through what are the main goals for each of these different fantastic foundations while we are early in the year, so that we can actually get in there and help them out. So, um, without any further ado, I am going to, let's see. This is also my first time using Riverside, so thank you. I'm going to bring Deb. Nope, that's wrong. I'm going to keep her backstage. Lies. I am going to bring Katie on stage. Hello, Katie.
Hello.
Thank you. Thank you for sticking with me in that rough opening. So, met Katie this past year, and she is actually with the Open Source Initiative, or the OSI, as you might know it. And she is going to be talking about the public policy program, because that is a lot of what they do. She's actually the senior US policy manager. And I read some interesting stuff that just before I hand it over to you, I want to say this was from your website. Open source software plays a central role in global innovation, research, and economic growth. We all know that.
Mm-hmm.
But according to a Harvard study from 2024, the open source ecosystem's demand side value is around 8.8 trillion TR, which was crazy. And firms would need to spend 3.5 times more on software than they currently do if open source software did not exist.
Mm-hmm.
So I just think that's crazy. So I am going to step away and have you share your screen and tell us a little bit about what you are doing. Let me see if that works. Yes, I am going to mute myself. Thanks so much. Take it away.
Okay, perfect. Well, thank you so much, Rachel. And good morning, good afternoon to everyone. Happy 2026. As Rachel said, my name is Katie Steen-James. I'm the Senior U.S. Policy Manager for the Open Source Initiative, or the OSI. We are a nonprofit, and we have been the stewards of the open source definition since the late 1990s. And what I'm going to talk about today is how OSI's work has kind of expanded in the last few years to focus, still focusing on the benefits of open source and, of course, approving licenses against the open source definition. But we've also expanded to work more on public policy in Europe and the US. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that. So these are kind of our main projects, the licensing and legal, which I think most people are probably aware of. That's what I mentioned earlier with approving licenses against the open source definition. Our policy and standards work, which is what I'm going to mostly talk about today. And then the advocacy and outreach, which is also part of what I'm going to talk about today. But this is just kind of a general overview of the projects that we have at OSI. So as I mentioned, the OSI approved licenses, which is probably what most of you know the OSI for, is something that we continue to do. We have a license committee that approves and reviews licenses that are submitted to the committee against the open source definition. So we continue to do that. But on the policy side, I wanted to just briefly kind of talk about who we are. So as I said, my name is Katie. I'm the Senior U.S. Policy Manager. I have my colleague Jordan, who is my counterpart in the European Union. And then I think many of you know Simon Phipps, who has been in the community for a very long time and in a part-time capacity continues to work on European standards for us. A person who is not on the slide, but who I'd be remiss if I didn't mention is also Deborah Bryant. She was leading the US policy work in a part-time capacity before I was hired just under a year ago. And Deb has also stepped up as the interim executive director for OSI and continues to support us on our public policy work as well. So OSI went from having two part-time folks with Simon and Deb, and then hired Jordan and myself. We are both full-time to really expand the work and impact on policy side of things. So, what are we actually doing, and what are our roles? I wanted to just share kind of a paraphrase from a blog that I wrote, which is on our website. There's the link there. That it's essentially encapsulates what we're doing, what our roles are, and really it's to educate policymakers about the benefits of open source software, track policy developments, and ultimately just ensure that open source developers can continue doing their work. So this is really for the community. We want to make sure that you can continue doing your work. And part of that is making sure that people know about the benefits of open source, understand how it works, and a lot of times don't inadvertently do something that doesn't necessarily intentionally restrict open source, but accidentally does. That's often what happens. So our role is to make sure people understand how open source software works. And then also, we continue to promote our definition of open source AI. I think, again, most folks in the community are very aware of our open source AI definition and the process that we undertook to do that, releasing it in October of 2024. So, what we continue to do now is make sure that policymakers and civil society organizations know that the open source AI definition exists. That's, I think, one of the biggest challenges is just awareness, especially with how quickly the AI kind of ecosystem is moving, and then encourage any AI policies to at least have the open source AI definition as a foundation. I'm going to talk a little bit more about the open source AI definition later and kind of what we're hoping to do in the future, but just wanted to also make sure that everyone understands that's still part of what we're promoting in our public policy work as well. So, activities. This entails meeting with lawmakers, responding to public consultations, requests for information. Public consultations in Europe is typically what it's called. Request for information is typically what it's called in the US context. Continuing our leadership and engagement on standards, specifically in the European context, which is Simon's portfolio. Coalition leadership, both informal and formal. And then developing and sharing educational resources on the intersection of open source and policy. So this might be on security issues, it might be on AI, but making sure that we have resources that are short and tailored towards policymakers to help them quickly understand the open source impact. So our present focus and goals. For Europe, and I don't want to spend too much time on this only because I could never do the job as well as my counterpart, Jordan. But I did just want to give you a rundown of what him and Simon are working on. Again, promoting the open source AI definition, CRA implementation, making sure that it's open source software friendly, standards with open source in mind, informing lawmakers about open source, and then continuing to strengthen the network that they have in Brussels, making sure people in Brussels know what the OSI is. Another one here that I didn't include on the slide, but I should mention is just implementation of the AI Act. The Code of Practice is something that Jordan is very involved in, trying to make sure that the open source voice is heard. So that's another part of that work as well. In the United States, we're also promoting the open source AI definition, working to strengthen the Open Policy Alliance. The Open Policy Alliance is an entity of nonprofit organizations that want to learn more, participate in U.S. policy discussions. I implore everyone, if you're a nonprofit organization, you want to get more involved in U.S. policy work, that you join the Open Policy Alliance. It is free to join. I lead that kind of coalition or organization, and we're really looking to strengthen it since it was created in 2023 through more regular meetings and engagement at both the federal and the state level on open source policy issues. Also, monitoring implementation of the White House AI Action Plan and the White House AI R&D strategy, and engaging in public comment. I'm not going to go too much into detail on what the White House AI Action Plan is, but it was released in July, includes a number of provisions. Some of them actually directly call out open source and open model AI systems. So one of the things I'm working on is tracking how different federal agencies are implementing that. They have also put out a public comment that we responded to with the Open Forum for AI out of Carnegie Mellon University on what an AI R&D strategy should include. They haven't released that strategy yet, but we'll also be tracking that. And we suggested that they look at the benefits of open source AI and what it brings to transparency and innovation as well. The other is tracking security provisions in federal legislation and the potential impact on open source software. I think we're all aware of the questions that come up around security and openness. So what I'm checking to make sure is that these large bills, particularly the big defense policy bill, that is one of the few pieces of legislation that the U.S. Congress does pass every year, checking to make sure there's not any language in there that would hurt open source software in terms of security. And then the last one, which is a little bit new for us, is tracking state legislation, specifically on AI and the potential impacts on open source software. We have seen, considering there's not been movement at the federal level on regulations for AI, a lot of states have been interested in pushing their own regulations. And so sometimes we've seen language that may try and put restrictions on downstream uses of an AI system or software within an AI system, and having no kind of carve out or exemption for open source. As we know, putting restrictions on open source software downstream doesn't make sense. That's not how the licenses work. So in that part, we're not, we don't have a position on regulating AI or not, but we just want to make sure that people are aware as they consider AI regulations, what the potential impact might be on open source. So an example of what that looks like that I worked on is this resource, which you can find on our website. And it's basically a 2-pager, not lobbying, but an educational piece for policymakers, specifically in the US, to consider when they're thinking about AI regulations. We want to make sure they consider the impact on open source software and don't put restrictions that would impact open source licenses. And again, that comes back to some of the same approaches we've tried to make in Europe with differentiating between the developer and the deployer, that these liability, if there is any, should really be on the deployer, and we don't want it affecting, upstream open source developers, which could have a chilling effect on the development. And then lastly, as I said, I did want to mention what we're hoping to do next on the open source AI definition. So as you know, it was released in October of 2024. What we're looking to do in the future and this year is continue to monitor the AI space, look at use cases of AI systems that actually meet our current definition, learn a little bit more about who releases what, under what conditions are they releasing them, what's happening outside of large language models and generative AI. We know there's other AI systems out there that are not LLMs. They might meet the definition. It's just hard to keep track of all the things that are being released these days because it's moving so fast. We also have a collaboration with a Duke master's student, Gabriel Toscano. He was also an intern with us over the summer, who is working on research on the prevalence of the use of the word open in AI models and what licenses are used in those models. We also want to establish an expert working group to evaluate specific model releases. And then this will lead to evolving that expert working group into a community-led entity that OSI is not leading but would be part of, that stewards updates to the open source AI definition, run a process for addressing some of the issues that came out after the release and that have come up since then, and then hopefully release a new version of the open source AI definition. And that is my last slide. I think I'm right on time. So I just want to thank you for listening, and I'm happy. I'll go look at the chat. I had not been following it now, and happy to respond to any questions in the chat. So with that, I think I'll turn it back to Rachel.
Perfection. Thank you so much. That basically what I've been thinking while you were talking was, wow, a lot really goes into open source, and you exposed but how long was it? Like 15 minutes of what you do. I mean, it's amazing, it's global. Um it's important. I guess I want to say that yeah, that it's important, and that, well, do you need help? I'm guessing maybe. I don't know. You tell me.
Yeah, no, it would. I think in the US in particular, the Open Policy Alliance, which I mentioned, and I'll put a link in the chat. It's free to join. If you're a nonprofit, a couple of folks, Deb with the Python Foundation and Ruth with Apache, are they are members of the Open Policy Alliance. So I would just really encourage folks to join that. You can reach out to me at my email, or go onto our website and see how you can join, because it's free. It's not a heavy lift, and that allows, especially maybe under-resourced parts of the open source community who don't have enough money to have an in-house policy person, can still engage, because that's what my role is. So would really encourage folks to join that.
And do you interact with OSPOs a lot?
Yeah, so through the Open Forum for AI, which is a effort led out of Carnegie Mellon, which I mentioned we had done some public comments with. That's kind of the academic side of open source, wanting to try and bring the academic perspective to these open source AI
Sure.
conversations, in addition to like government conversations in industry. They represent a lot of OSPOs, university OSPOs in particular, but then also OSI engages with OSPOs that are in industry, within companies as well. So yeah, that's a big part of it too. Something I'm really interested, which it kind of just depends, is OSPOs in government. The United Nations, obviously, it has a big push on that, but I've even suggested that to some state lawmakers of, this is a great way for you to get the most out of open source to serve your citizens. So
For
that's
sure.
another part of the OSPO world that I think we could use even more kind of engagement on, is within government.
Maybe we'll do an OSPO event later in the year.
That'd be great. Yeah.
Awesome. All right. Well, thank you so much for taking the time. It's not nothing to put together a presentation and then show up. So if anyone has any questions for Katie, put them in the chat. We're going to have recordings of these after, so make sure that you share them. So Katie, with that, farewell.
Thank you.
Okay. Bye. Okay. That was really great. Thanks again. And we are going to move on to our next speaker and session. So the next one is it's really interesting. I want to know what you think. It's definitely not contentious, but it's new. And I want to see what you think. So building self-sustaining foundations. This is something, funding for foundations is something that's talked about a lot. So we have Patrick Masson of the Apereo Foundation. I'll put that link in the chat after we get going. He's the executive director. And so the Apereo Foundation, speaking of higher ed, I'm going to read a little bit about what they do. Global community of developers, academics, and ed tech companies collaborating to develop and implement open source software to advance teaching, learning, and research. So I actually didn't know very much about them until I met Patrick, but it's been very interesting, collaborating with him and learning more about the Apereo Foundation. And so I'm going to get this. I'm going to share my screen, and we are going to run this theoretically. We'll see. 1 second. Let me do one thing here. I'm actually not going to show myself. How do I do that? Okay, great. You can probably still hear me for a moment. And let me hit play on this, and we will be off to the races.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining me. Today, we're going to explore what it really takes to make open source foundations self-sustaining, not just in terms of software, but in terms of people, purpose, and resources. I'm Patrick Masson, Executive Director of the Apereo Foundation, and I want to challenge the assumption that free software means free labor. Our code is free, but our time, skills, and expertise shouldn't be. A little bit about Apereo, if you're not familiar with our work. Apereo's mission is to increase the awareness, adoption, and development of open source software in education. All of our projects have origins in higher education. Let's start where open source began. As Eric Raymond said in The Cathedral and the Bazaar, every good work of software starts by scratching a developer's personal itch. This idea, solving your own problem, is at the heart of open source's origins. Most early contributors were users first, not vendors or service providers. Think of Richard Stallman, who wanted greater control of MIT's new Xerox printer, Larry Wall, who created Perl to automate tasks while at Unisys, or the Apache HTTP server being patched by web sysadmins for sysadmins. These weren't passion projects, entrepreneurial startups, investments for new business. They were purpose-driven for their own use, built because someone needed them to work so they could do their real jobs. But own use wasn't just a motivator. It was also a sustainability model. Companies paid engineers to improve tools they used. Think IBM and Linux, Google with Android, or Red Hat with GNOME. They paid staff to improve the tools they relied on. This institutional backing ensured long-term viability. They weren't supporting the projects, they were rightly, selfishly scratching their own itch. And we see this reflected in the research. A 2012 study shows that own use was the primary motivator for contributors. It wasn't about giving back or even building community. It was about making your own life easier. This is the crucial point. When open source code contributions align with personal needs, even if part business or organizational work, support follows. And I should be clear here, the support is in the form of code and arguably funding by possibly third parties, employers, research grants, etc., who at the end of the day are paying for the work. The key to sustainability is not just passion, it's purpose tied to actual use. Steven Weber pointed this out over 20 years ago. Open source software has often been a byproduct of paid work, not a hobby, not a launch of a startup. Developers were building common tools as part of their jobs and sharing the work across industries. Everyone is creating websites, and web servers alone don't create industry advantage. So we might as well all use and maintain the same, thus reducing our own costs. Thus, open source is a byproduct of other primary work. In roads and bridges, open source is infrastructure, and infrastructure needs maintenance. The problem is both developers and adopters have moved away from those support practices. In fact, a 2021 study shows that own use motivation has declined over time, while motivations related to personal benefits have increased. A key insight from that 2021 study shows own use, while still a strong motivator, has declined overall, while motivations that complement professional development and opportunities that foster greater pay, career advancement, increased reputation, and learning are increasing. These are powerful, but they're not sustainable on their own, don't always align with long-term project needs, or address funding realities. This chart shows how motivations diversify over time. While this is healthy for building communities, it poses challenges for sustainability. We need systems that support contributors even if they're not scratching their own itch. Today, open source is no longer just infrastructure, it's strategy. Microsoft, Google, Meta, but just as relevant for startups and small to medium businesses, they all invest in open source because they see it as providing a competitive edge, innovation through customization, or even starting parking their own projects, pace of development to drive, even lead a sector, to ease entry into new markets. Indeed, emphasizing again own use motivations at a corporate level, but not those expressed by developers. The concept of own seems to have changed in open source over time. From Webster's, own is defined as an adjective used to stress doing something without the help of another person. As a verb, it is to have or hold as property, to possess, or even to have power or mastery over, to dominate. In the early 2000s, it was mostly undifferentiated infrastructure. Linux, MySQL, Apache was used by everyone. Using Linux or Apache doesn't give Walmart an edge over Target. No one ever said, I buy my printer paper at Target because I really like their IT stack. But in the 2010s, the motivations and those who were motivated changed. Tech companies and providers began customizing, contributing to, and commercializing open source to gain strategic advantages. Companies now invest strategically in open source software to control roadmaps, ecosystems, and standards. But ironically, many of the projects that they rely on still are maintained by volunteers or underfunded teams. Strategic differentiation through open source creates competitive advantages, driving innovation to capture markets. But this innovation isn't always driven by the projects or foundations. Rather, it's by the adopters. If projects and foundations want to continue to cultivate communities of collaboration for co-creation, we need to find another sustainability model, moving away from own use and we own the use motivations. So to review, open source software moved from being community infrastructure to strategic assets. Companies began customizing and scaling localized variants. Now, leading an open source software project means influencing the direction of entire industries. How many foundations versus companies do you see doing this? Think of Google's influence with Kubernetes, or Meta setting the standard with React, or AWS forking various projects. Think of Google's AGPL policy, community source, and open core business models. Corporate own use software doesn't thrive in open source ecosystems. They thrive on open source practices, on open source developers, and on open source communities. It's leverage. And these projects are only sustainable because they align with business value. So how do we support the rest of the ecosystem? The projects without corporate backing. We adopt their model. We need to think beyond donations. We need foundations to act like entrepreneurs, offering services, tools, support for value. Read those bullet points again. Do these describe how foundations work or how tech companies in open source ecosystems work? Like bridges, if we don't maintain them, they collapse. So the question is, how do we maintain the maintainers? But I have another definition of maintainers. Not supporting individuals, just like I wouldn't support individual companies. Rather, I define maintainers as the community that supports the projects. So we ask, how do we maintain the maintainers? The answer is self-sustainability, not relying entirely on grants, annual sponsorships, or other soft money, but building services to create value, sharing resources to reduce costs, and investing in expertise to drive innovation and direction that supports both the values of open source and the mission of the project or foundation. We can't rely on the goodwill alone. Open source software must be funded through real work, education, training, support, and infrastructure. Gratitude doesn't pay contributors. Let me share some concrete entrepreneurial ways open source foundations can generate revenue without relying solely on donations or grants. All of these are service foundations are uniquely equipped to provide. These aren't stretch goals, these are within reach. Self-sustainability doesn't mean going it alone. It means charge for services rooted in project community foundation expertise. Extend capacity through shared cross-community. Develop partnerships with diverse subject matter experts to expand offerings. And share non-technical infrastructure to reduce costs. Crucially, it means realizing that contributing code, organizing events, or training others is real labor, and it can generate real value not just for a project or foundation's internal community, and not even just external organizations that rely on the project or foundation's work. Any organization that values open source software, development, or communities and wants to engage authentically would benefit from working with, paying for a foundation's services and experts. Here are some examples. Event toolkits and white label conferences. This should be an easy one to conceptualize. Many projects already run events, host meetups, and organize conferences. For others outside your organizations, expertise in engaging open source communities, even those not affiliated with your project, has real value and it's worth paying for. Offer training and certificates like Linux Foundation Kubernetes certs. You already have expertise. People are willing to pay for certifications. Charge companies for your brand commercially. This is an example Moodle undertakes, an open source learning management system that requires those who want to use the Moodle mark to advertise their support of the learning management system to pay a percentage of their revenue. Run innovation labs. Help others launch open source projects the right way with governance, docs, and licensing support. Host, build pipelines, CI/CD, and software bill of material ready services, a trusted supply chain offering. Analytics can provide ecosystem insights, version, use health metrics to commercial users. Referrals, provide contacts to companies that are interested in getting support from those that are actually working on the project. Neutral IP and governance help companies open source their code the right way. Long-term support provide enterprise-ready builds for organizations. Mentorship and community coaching, helping those new to open source and self-sustainability understand and adopt these approaches. Build and release engineering services and more, often exclusive to your project or foundation. For example, at Apereo, we could offer support around online learning, educational technology, LTI standards and integration, instructional design, applying for research grants in ed tech, and more. So to close, open source is no longer just a model for building software. It's a model for building value, and we have to treat it that way. If we want our foundations and our maintainers to thrive, we need to support them, not just with gratitude, but with infrastructure, investment, and income. Thank you. I'm Patrick Masson, and I'd love to hear your ideas on building more sustainable open source for the future. Thank you.
Awesome. Like I said, a lot to think about there. A lot of great ideas, a lot of great discussions, I hope, can be taken from that. And yeah, I want to thank Patrick very much. And that is another session that we will have available after the live event as well. So next we have Ruth, I believe. Let's bring her on stage, if you will. Hi, Ruth.
Hello.
So we are going to, I shall introduce you now in the Apache Foundation, but again, I feel like who doesn't know this? But okay, so Ruth Suehle, President, Apache Software Foundation. She is going to be talking about modernizing all those projects. And I saw, did I say Geo 2.0 like announcement yesterday, I think?
Yeah, another release.
Awesome. So she is going to be talking about secure compliant releases and just a couple of details about the Apache Software Foundation. 290 plus open source projects, over 9,800 committers, and just to name a few projects that I'm sure you all know: Spark, Hadoop, Kafka, and Airflow, and Flink. And just because she needs to do everything, she's also director of open source at SAS. So thank you so much for coming here and speaking. And I am going to step out. And if you will share your screen, we will be good to go.
I actually don't have slides. You just get me.
Oh, fantastic. Then I'm just going to hide me then.
Yeah. So thanks. That was a great intro. I do wear quite a few hats. I do run an OSPO. Before that, I spent 15 years at Red Hat, mostly in the OSPO there. I'm also a member of the Open Source Initiative Board of Directors and as Rachel mentioned, president of the Apache Software Foundation, or the ASF, which I know sounds like I have more than one full-time job, but a lot of folks don't realize the ASF is still nearly entirely volunteer run, and that includes the officers and the board. So that is the reason that I list those things, because I do hate when people spend all of a talk introducing themselves, is that that's a lot of several long established organizations in open source software. So open source under that name and the ASF as well are closing in on 30 years old, which means we've lived through a lot of technology waves, from the early web stuff to cloud to AI now, all the spots in between. And specific technologies, though, are mostly like clouds, but more like real clouds. So, and I say that because they come and they go, they blow in, they blow out. What lasts is not those specific technologies, but the structures that help people build them together. And remembering that is what's going to propel us through the next 30 years and beyond. At which point, I hope very much to not still be talking about this personally, but to have been a piece of this successful ecosystem that continues to be as critical, or even perhaps more so, to the world as open source is today. So I also have to admit that I'm going to go a bit off the rails from the advertised title of this talk. Security is still a part of it, but the overarching theme of this event is open source in 2026. And looking at 2026 and beyond, I'm actually thinking about three things, both for the ASF and for the entire open source ecosystem, because none of us are doing this alone. We're all pieces of that ecosystem. And those three things are security, which, as promised, but also sustainability and stewardship, because they're not three separate things. I think of them as three legs holding up the same chair, making sure that the open source ecosystem they're holding up doesn't just survive, but continues to thrive. So I didn't feel like I could get very far into security without talking about the other two pieces, but I will definitely start there. And that's because over the last few years, there have been some high profile security vulnerabilities that have repeatedly demonstrated to the world at large that software is never entirely secure. This is not a huge revelation, I'm sure, to anyone listening. What was seemingly a new piece of information to a lot of people was that so much of the important software in the world is open source. And thus, a lot of them who hadn't been around in all those years assumed that the problem was caused by open source being somehow less secure. And we know, and we have the data to show that that's not accurate. And we can explain in each one of those cases, whatever someone might be concerned about, why the openness of the software in question was not the problem. So, for example, Log4Shell was truly a vulnerability, not malicious code. And that's a distinction that matters. More recently, the XEUtils backdoor, it was possible in the way that it was created because the software was open source. However, a similar malicious actor certainly could have, and probably has, I try not to think about that too hard, done the same thing by gaining trust as an employee of a company, creating that malicious code in proprietary software. The important difference is that because XE was open, we were able to see it and discover it and intervene. And that actually happened before it became a significant problem. We likely couldn't say the same if it were not open. So, because of open source's prevalence in the global software ecosystem, not anything specifically wrong with open source, these incidents, as they continue to happen, moved open source security from being this sort of niche concern of the security folks to being truly a geopolitical and regulatory priority. And we already heard some of this from Katie. So, it's okay to think for a moment about what a big change that is. So, open source went from the perception of being this thing that hobbyists did to eventually being described in the occasional tech article as maybe a potentially viable competitor, to being so critical that it's the subject of significant regulatory concern around the world. And we've got people like Katie thinking about it as their entire jobs. And that all happened in about 25 years, give or take how you do the math. So now, again, because of its success, because you don't bother attacking things that nobody uses, we've got these security incidents happening, and they really highlight that the most significant risk lies not in new or even complex necessarily applications, but in these ubiquitous foundational utilities that are often maintained by a handful of volunteers, or worst case, one, maybe two. And then that brings attention to who those volunteers are, who uses their code, how this whole system works that has largely become indispensable without much notice. And that's how we got to this part where the last couple of years, governments have begun to step in with regulation. So in the UK, there was the PSTI Act, and Katie talked a lot about the executive orders and other movement in the US. And then, of course, EU has the Cyber Resilience Act, or the CRA. And the CRA is the one really top of mind for a lot of the industry right now. The December 2027 date when it goes into full effect still sounds really far away. It sounds far away, but it's not. But security reporting obligations go into effect, check your calendar, 8 months minus 2 days from right now. 8 months. Complying with all this still feels like a really gargantuan task, even to large software producing corporations, much less independent software developers. The recognition in the CRA of open source stewards being spelled out, that carve out is going to help us all a lot. And working together as an open source ecosystem instead of as individual companies and projects and foundations is going to continue to be vitally important. If figuring all this out is important to you and you haven't yet found the Open Regulatory Compliance Working Group yet, I highly recommend visiting the website. It's orcwg.org. If someone who is not talking could type that in chat for folks, that would be helpful. orcwg.org. And then if you happen to be in Brussels in a couple of weeks for all of the open source week activities, there's a ton going on there. The ORC community will have a code and compliance event. There's a whole CRA and practice dev room, policy summit. I'll be speaking at a lot of these. And if you're not, these sorts of events are going on around the world all the time. Really, this is a hot topic of conversation. And one of the things I'm most interested in discussing at all these events is the fact that we're going to have to see some new ways of looking at investment in the ecosystem to address all of those changing requirements. And Patrick talked a little bit about that, and I'll get back to it in a bit. Back at the ASF, one of the biggest changes in 2025 for us, and very important for several reasons, was the launch of our tooling initiative. It's the first of a new program called ASF Initiatives, and there will be more of those, but this particular one aims to streamline development and continue improving our already strong security posture, but there's always more you can do, right? So the tooling initiative's core project is called Apache Trusted Releases, or ATR, and that is a secure distribution platform for releases. It has a web app that handles the full release process. Projects can upload their artifacts from an assortment of methods because, as Rachel mentioned, the ASF has hundreds of projects and we don't mandate every detail of how they work. So that's why there are a lot of options there for whatever's appropriate for each community. ATR also has additional features for projects with reproducible builds. It's got assorted policy and standards checks, SBOM verification, for example. It has been through a public alpha and is heading into a production-ready beta with even more on the horizon this year, like SALSA and attestation checks. So I am really excited about what this will do for our projects and communities and ultimately for their users. Really excited about watching that grow this year. Because the world has figured out that open source software is not just here, but actually, in fact, utterly critical to modern life. So I want to build a metaphor for you. The open source ecosystem is a garden that ultimately produces the crops that become all the critical software and networks and tools and the internet itself, really. It is a community garden where we can all come together to plant the things we collectively need, and we tend to them together because it's wasting resources to each build our own gardens. But this little garden that we started almost 30 years ago has really turned into more of a massive farm at this point, and we need to keep our crops safe in a variety of ways. So those regulators are starting to build fences around the garden, and we're all learning to use the fiddly latch on the gate, and they're telling us who's going to be responsible if someone gets ergot poisoning from our grain field, to really stretch this metaphor. Those of you who may have heard me talk about the history of intellectual property law before have also heard me talk about how early trademark law in the 1600s was a very similar situation to this, but for bakers. You were legally required with really stiff penalties to put your personal mark on your bread, which was effectively assigned at a station of your bread so that when it was found to be of inferior quality or somebody got sick, they knew who had created it and could probably even trace the grain back to where it came from to hold those folks responsible. I promise I do sometimes think about metaphors that don't have anything to do with grain or bread. Today is not that day. So I'm going to keep leaning on this garden metaphor. And that brings us to the second piece of those three, which is sustainability. And again, these are not separate issues, they're quite intertwined. A lot of people hear sustainability as a polite euphemism for give me money. And I've spent a lot of time in conference talks and panels and interviews now insisting that it's so much more than that. It's more than money, and it is. So I'm not contradicting myself. However, right now, I do want to talk about the money part for a moment. Patrick talked a lot about it, so I want to highlight it as well. All of that regulatory compliance and increased focus on security isn't going to come for free, and probably not cheaply either. To meet these demands coming at us, the SBOMs, release attestations, even formal risk-based triage, all of those steps require a lot, dedicated infrastructure and tools and expertise. And that means we're finding that the old model of expecting volunteers who may or may not be paid by their employers to do the work to take care of everything just isn't going to keep working forever. So, in this metaphorical community garden, we need those people who are benefiting from the harvest on the other end to buy seeds and fertilizer and spend some time weeding and to pay a gardener to do it for them when they're not able to. And it would be really great if, as this gets bigger, if maybe we could get an irrigation system in here to relieve the burden on those gardeners doing it all by hand. And if those who want the harvest at the end can't help with any of that, then we have to find a way to explain that the garden can't keep feeding them because it will fall apart. So yeah, the ecosystem needs funding. For all these years, we have looked to the corporate consumers of open source to support it with financial contributions and sometimes hiring contributors to do the work, largely through let's say fairly soft motivation. Why companies contribute to projects and foundations varies both by company and the thing they're supporting, but across the board, we're hearing that the old ways just aren't enough anymore. And as the world continues to change in the next few years or 8 months minus 2 days, the gap between what the open source ecosystem has and what it needs is going to continue to widen. So we can grow increasingly vast fields of metaphorical wheat together, much larger than any of us could have built alone, which means we can grow more together than we each could have grown alone. And when it comes time for the harvest, I can make flour and you can create biofuels and somebody else can use it to make starch for industrial purposes because wheat is pretty magical like that. But we've reached a time where a lot of corporate consumers are happy to drive by the field once a month, make sure things are still growing, and then not show up until it's time to collect the harvest. Which also means that to some extent, we failed in an important job as the ones who built the garden because those corporate consumers are part of our community too. And we failed to adequately explain to them that open source truly is an ecosystem. And just like an actual ecological system, those being the words that form the ecosystem portmanteau, just like an ecology, if they're not putting back in, there will be nothing left to take out. And so, probably because it's a lot of the work that I've done for a long time and because I've seen them be successful at a lot of companies, I think a good bit of that work to help those corporate consumers understand this can be done by open source program offices, acknowledging that first they have to have one of those. But those are the groups that act as the advocates for upstream first in those companies. And upstream first isn't just a delightful philosophy, but it can be and should be a productive and useful part of the company's business model. Because industry has come to rely on open source without recognizing the work that its ongoing health requires. If we don't change that, there will be increasingly serious problems as projects collapse under the pressure. So, by way of example, touching back on the exautils incident, the reason a bad actor was able to gain the trust of the original maintainers was simply because they offered to help by offering to help on a heavily used and under-resourced project. It is hardly the only project in such a situation, and increasing participation from those who benefit from the results is the solution. And by the way, important side note, showing up for whoever might need to hear this or send this to someone else to hear, showing up on a project's doorstep demanding that they build the features you want or support your use for free is not actually participation. So I started the sustainability part by saying we need money. Money is important, but money isn't community. Having more contribution, and there are many kinds of contribution, having more contribution in a project reduces the strain probably at least as much as money and builds a community with a shared mission. It is so easy to underestimate the importance of the community building piece, especially for those figuring out how all this even works, for the folks who are still new to the whole open source concept beyond, oh, look, free software. because what they're there for, they're here for the code, right? You just want the software. And that's exactly the outlook that leads to the problem. Just hand me the code. But at the ASF, our motto is community over code. And that's for a very good reason, because I like to say a strong and healthy community comes first, because community can fix bad code, but good code can't fix a bad community. And that means that the next important step is for some of the gardeners to contribute by teaching gardening so that new gardens can thrive. And that gets me to the last piece, which is stewardship. I think this is a piece where the ASF shines and can help other projects and foundations by setting an example of a full cradle to grave life cycle for projects, or more accurately in our terms, it would be incubator to attic. It's important to look at community health from end to end. And so the incubator is where new projects, or podlings we call them, begin. It's where they learn the Apache way. That includes that leadership is earned, not bought. No single company should hold the keys to a project. A lot of things about working together as a community. At the other end of the life cycle, we have the attic, which is where a project goes when it's time for retirement. Because by being honest about what no longer needs to be maintained, we get to protect users and free up contributors to work on something new. I am sure that you can think of situations you've been in, either in a company or even your project communities, where something had a good life, but the organization didn't have a structure to give it a good ending. And that's what the attic is a way to give projects a good ending. So what I'd like to see us work on more in 2026, not just at the ASF, but around the ecosystem, is a piece in the middle of that life cycle that I think many, if not most, open source projects could benefit from. And that is better onboarding of new contributors. Because coming into open source projects 15 and 20 and 25 years ago, and more at this point, was very different. The software is much more complex today, and jumping in is intimidating. Not only is the software itself more complex, but over time, communities have fallen into, we can call them habits, routines. Don't get me wrong, social norms are an important part of communities. Those repeated patterns make things easier, smoother. They build cohesiveness and bonding. However, even when they're ultimately good habits, there's still something that have to be learned by newcomers, sometimes effectively acting like a shibboleth. And that is just one more hurdle to participation, to getting those new people inside. And then, of course, sometimes there's bad habits, or sometimes it's just comfort and inertia, all of which can easily look like attempts to actively prevent newcomers from joining in. Recruiting is hard work, so don't waste the time it took to find those new contributors by making their experience so terrible they leave, and then you have to start over and do all that work over again. We all need to be doing a better job becoming better role models for the next generation of contributors and helping them build whatever the next level of success for open source looks like. Stewarding processes, teaching the Apache way, this is a great step in the right direction. But the goal here isn't just taking care of the software or tending the garden. It ultimately has to also be about taking care of the gardeners themselves and the health of their communities that keep the gardens alive, making sure that they're teaching their skills to new folks and taking care of one another, because life happens to all of us. We are still humans. So to lean on my metaphor one last time, I swear, I want to tell you about a real botanical garden, the botanical garden at the University of Padua. It was created by an architect who learned from other gardens and built this one to teach others. And so then a few years later, as it grew, it was enclosed with a wall for security. And then a little bit after that, they added irrigation systems to improve growth. And they added attractive gates into the fences and better decor. And you can't meet anyone who did that, because they built this garden in 1545. And then they taught others what they knew. And it's been teaching and preserving and making important contributions, not just to botany, but chemistry and medicines and other fields continuously ever since then. And that's what we should do. That's why keeping all three of these goals tied together is so important. Security and sustainability and stewardship go together, and they're how we get the harvest that continues to feed everyone every year. And beyond that, to be able to make new innovations, not just in software, but in all of the fields that they touch. So that is what I am excited to think about in 2026. And please feel free to reach out. If you can spell my last name, you can find me pretty much anywhere on the internet. I'll type it in the chat in case you missed it at the beginning. So thanks.
That was a barn burner. I loved it. Just to go on with your metaphor. No, that was great. Thank you. I feel fired up.
Awesome.
And I appreciate your bringing that to us. And hopefully that's something that we can spread far and wide. Because I do agree with you. I think there's lots of different contributors needed. Things are breaking down. I mean, one of the reasons I wanted to, and I think everybody else wanted to do this, is because there is such a need for participation in open source. and with the foundations, right? The foundations are critical to open source. And so it's important that we support them in many different ways. So thank you very much for taking the time. And we will move on to the next session.
Awesome.
Okay. So next we have, let me pop her up on the screen here. Deb Nicholson of the Python Software Foundation. She is the executive director. And so for those of you who may not know, the Python Software Foundation is the nonprofit steward of the Python programming language, which if you don't know about that, I don't really know about you because it's in everything. And it is basically one of the underpinnings, I feel like, of the data and AI content and programs and services and changing the world and everything else, right? So Deb is going to talk about funding Python's future, which just grows and grows and grows and grows. And I saw there was a good contribution. Was it yesterday? I'll let you talk about that. So I will slip away, and if you want to share, please do that.
All right. Okay, tap, is this thing on? I suppose it is. So thank you for that lovely introduction, Rachel. And yeah, we did just get a really big donation in from Anthropic. It is unearmarked, which is amazing, and matches what we were going to take from the NSF. So thanks for them for doing that. Very exciting times. That said, I am still going to talk about funding Python's future because any graph that you would look at, and I didn't bring slides, but you can find these anywhere on the internet, usage for Python has done like this. So we basically, anything that comes in, we can spend almost immediately on continuing to provide Python, making sure that we are taking care of the legal infrastructure, that like the trademarks and things like that, and then also providing for the massive global Python community. So I want to talk a little bit about like Python as the Software Foundation as a nonprofit. So my background, I've been doing nonprofit work for a long time, like basically since I was a teenager, which is a really long time ago now. But we used to always think about funding for nonprofits in a really specific way. We would talk about this like sort of pyramid, and you would have like a base of small, dependable donations at the bottom from individual contributors, and then you would have this middle of like corporate sponsors, like folks that always sponsor your events or sponsor your, different activities and things like that. And then at the top would be like kind of like a bonus of less dependable, like intermittent monies that come as large gifts from like maybe unreliable sources where you're like, that's great. Who knows if that'll ever happen again, but we will take it and use it and kind of plow it back into our fields to go further with our farm metaphors here. And this is how traditional nonprofits have always tried to function. And so for us, like, looking at that pyramid, like we do individual memberships. We do like we sell t-shirts, we have an event, we sell tickets to that event, things like that. And so that's great. But like the tech nonprofit picture is really different. Like it's almost all middle, where it's like recurring donations from corporations that use your software. And that is like sort of our bread and butter. So it's definitely not a pyramid. Maybe it's like a water wheel or a churn, or like if you're growing, maybe it looks like Katamari Damacy, where you're just collecting stocks and bureaus and piles of cash all the time, which would be great. And so, this is like a really different kind of fundraising. So like, instead of long-term plans, it requires you to be constantly aware of who is using your software, who your stakeholders are, and to be constantly pivoting and adjusting and meeting those needs. Now for Python, that's great because like I said, the growth has gone up. Python is the language of choice for AI. Like, we've been good for math and data for a really, really long time. There's a lot of libraries, a ton of robust support. And that has only grown as people are finding new and different ways to use AI. Some great, some the other thing, but they're still using Python. But the churn is a lot of work. And then, like, just to kind of, we haven't said, this is about 2026, right? So just to say, like, the last year's been a really weird one. Well, for a lot of reasons, but for nonprofits in specific. Domestically, like here in the US where we're based, there's been a lot of layoffs and a lot of inflation that affects individual giving. And then internationally, cuts to organizations like USAID have impacted large traditional grant-making organizations. Those funders have seen a massive influx of new requests. So like things that were being taken care of are back on the needs help pile. So like all of the sort of funding sources for traditional like humanitarian nonprofits have like kind of just gotten, think of someone trying to pour a gallon of milk into a teacup with requests. So that has sort of changed the traditional nonprofit landscape. And that's relevant to us because we do some outreach, and we've been thinking about like, oh, maybe we could more specifically do outreach for funding on our grants program, our educational work, and our humanitarian stuff. Not at this moment. The specific picture for tech nonprofits, so that's kind of like more generally speaking, like people kind of have less money and the money that's out there has more people looking for it. But specifically speaking about like tech nonprofits, the layoffs and inflations have affected us over here as well. There's been this massive push to automate. I think that might be counterbalancing. I'm like kind of thinking 2026 might be the year where they realize that, some of the things cannot actually be replaced with AI. Like you can't just tell AI like, hey, can you do Sarah's job? You have to have someone who actually understands what Sarah's job is to feed stuff into those prompts, and actually who's better than Sarah for that. But, so maybe that massive like kind of downturn and layoff situation is starting to change. I do think also too, like we lost a lot of like kind of our superstar open source contributors lost their jobs and their influence within the companies. And I think this is it kind of degrades the relationship between companies and the folks, they're upstream. So someone might look on paper the same as any other person like contributing and writing Python code at your workplace, but what's maybe not captured in their like kind of KPIs is the person who has a really good, solid relationship with the upstream community, who understands the priorities, the things that are going on, the conversations that are happening, the changes that are coming to the language. And so, like a person who is willing to participate in project governance, like should be last on your layoff list. If in case anyone wants my 2 cents on it. But I would also say that those people are often willing to mentor newcomers and things like that. And that's an employee you want. But it also makes it like a lot of our relationships with that middle or that water wheel or that collection of socks and dressers depends on an individual relationship. So we spend a lot of time maintaining those relationships and making sure that they're solid. But that still is not enough to, to cover exponential growth of the Python community. So I want to, I know there is more funding for some stuff. Like Ruth talked a lot about how like we finally all know that security is a thing that you want to fund. And I think almost everybody understands that security is not like, oh, maybe your really smart nephew could just like kind of do it. And it's like, no, it has to be a specific person that really understands like how security works, because it's important to get right. And it takes a certain amount of expertise, which means it takes a certain amount of money. As Patrick was talking about, we have to pay people for their work, and doing something that you can get, I don't know, like a 300K plus salary a year for, as a volunteer, loses its luster pretty fast. So, so I think those are things that we do need to pay for, and people are excited to pay for security. We just have to make sure that the expectation of how far that goes, like it can't be a hat that we pass and people throw coins in. So that said, we've also noticed that companies want a little bit more than code over the wall. So like the companies and corporate entities that do get it, they want to know. They're like, oh, what's on the roadmap? What are the new features? What's going to change in the next iteration of Python? And we really encourage that, because I think that gives us kind of the best, most sustainable partners, like people who kind of understand the big picture and like what is coming down the pike. So that does create some opportunities as well, like companies that want more from the ecosystem than just like, okay, you send a newsletter, it's a great newsletter, but what else? Or like, yes, we attend the event, like it's a great event, awesome, what else? So we've been thinking a lot about what else, and some of that creates some opportunities for funding, and some of this will be a little bit overlap with what Patrick talked about, and some of it's a little different. Our use case is slightly different than Apereo's. So historically, the PSF has relied primarily on funding from corporate users of Python, just as a, like, we like you. They're not like, we're not selling anything to them. It's usually a completely unearmarked situation. And I suspect this is true at most other programming languages and similar open source tech stacks. Like, people are like, well, I have a vague sense of responsibility based on my perceived usage and my perceived size in your ecosystem. And we write a check, and somehow those all get rounded down, it feels like, but I mean, not all, but many. And then, like many other groups, we also host an event that used to be a significant source of revenue. The margin on events has been shrinking. I think they're still worth doing because the learning and the networking and the time to work together is still really important. But the heyday of events where there was like hot breakfast for the 11 people that woke up on Sunday morning to witness it is probably going by the wayside. They're going to start to feel a little bit more, maybe like something more casual that you would go to in your own community, as opposed to like so many blinking lights and free champagne. Not that we ever had free champagne at PyCon, but so the events have gotten more expensive, and the international attendance has gone down for PyCon US, which is the one that we run. And people's appetite for a very expensive conference ticket has not kept pace with inflation. So we're looking on ways to change the revenue and cost, but we're also looking at ways to add different revenue streams to our picture. So I know Patrick did talk about services, and we've been looking at that too. So a little over a year ago, we rolled out PyPI organizations. So organization account features are the first step to like kind of providing companies sort of a workspace within their usage of the package index on the Python servers. And so they can have like kind of a little bit of branding so that you can see that a package is part of a group. At an operational level, it makes it easier for companies that use PyPI a lot to be able to set permissions on who can add stuff, who can edit stuff, who can be part of the group. Or somebody leaves, and then instead of trying to figure out which of your 87 packages they were involved on or had permissions on, you remove them from the group, or you add them to the group when you hire new people. And we do this for like corporate users of PyPI, but it's free for academic and nonprofit and individual users to access those same kinds of features. We've also been looking into like, is there security work that we can do, like attestations, or just like raw, like adding additional storage or bandwidth for different users of the package index. Because right now, like our bandwidth is like, woo, so we cap everyone's usage of like and size of package that they can put on there. But there is desire for that. So we've been looking at how to make that a service thing that that people pay us for, so that the usage of Python and PyPI is tied to the revenue that we receive, which it isn't now. It has like the loosest relationship ever. It's like your pen pal from 4th grade whose last name you don't remember. So we're trying to get those two things in sync. I would think some other things that we're looking at, if there's information that we could provide, or like allowing people to kind of do better analysis of the traffic and usage of their packages, maybe. But all of these things are sort of tied to the usage of Python and PyPI, so that people can support it in a way that really is like commensurate with the usage and the work that it causes for the foundation. Another thing that we are looking at is, I mentioned that we have a grants program and we support events and communities all over the world that are using Python, especially like entities in communities where people are teaching Python to each other. It's actually one of my favorite things about our community, is meeting like the dozens and dozens of people all over the world that are like, as soon as I learned Python, I decided I would try and find other people to teach it to, which is like amazing and inspiring, and something that we have yet to find like a dedicated funding source for. So that's something we're still looking for. It's a little rough, as I mentioned. Traditional grants are kind of overwhelmed with requests for core support. So like if you're going into like different communities where like food or water or housing or medical supplies are funded by outside aid, they're not really, if they have to meet those needs before they can even consider talking about educational opportunities. So it's hard for us to find like an entity that specifically is like teaching people Python. That's my favorite. I want to write you a big check. So I guess I'm manifesting that for 2026. If you heard that and you were like, I love teaching people Python, I love other people teaching people Python, and I can write a big check, please email me. But we're continuing to look at grants and other things like that. And we're also open to collaboration with other nonprofits for this work. So we don't have to do it alone. There's a lot of different other organizations doing other work. It has been a weird year. I feel like maybe 2026 is the year where we, just get over it and meet the new reality. I mean, for our work here, do whatever else you want to do in your own time. But yeah, so the pyramid for funding is a pipe dream. So I guess we welcome the water wheel, or the massive rubber ball band that we just keep putting new stuff on. So we're pursuing different avenues for funding. And I think it's really important, Ruth touched on this a little bit, that we continue to talk to each other about like how we leverage different opportunities, look at new ways to think about funding, and maybe work on some of those opportunities together. So, you want to collaborate on seeking funding with the PSF, let me know. Otherwise, I'll take any questions that pop up in the chat and give the conch back to Rachel.
Hello. Thank
Hello.
you. That was great. I'm in awe of how much knowledge all of you have. So that was really great. Thank you so much. Also, I remember Katamara Damacy, and that made me chuckle a couple of times, as you mentioned. Yes. So let's see. You can answer questions in the chat, and I'm sure people will follow up. But that was really great. And I can give a big thumbs up to PyCon. I've been there. It's awesome. So you should go. And All right. Well, thank you. We are going to move to our next speaker. Thank you very much, Deb. See you
Thank
later.
you. Thanks for having me.
Let me see here. Lori. Hi.
Hi.
Okay. We have Lori, as you can see, Lori Lorusso from the Rust Foundation. She is Director of Outreach, previously with Percona and JFrog. And so Rust is an independent, nonprofit organization dedicated to stewarding the Rust programming language, supporting Rust communities worldwide, and investing in the Rust talent pool, which is awesome. And so,
And I'm done.
yeah, and thank you. Okay, so this is going to, continue. I like your angle here. So supporting the humans behind the code, how foundations and projects thrive together. So, I mean, it's basically, I feel like a lot of this has been, we all need to work together, and we needs to be a lot more people. But I'll let you speak and share your slides if you do have them, and I will see you on the other side.
Okay, awesome. I do have slides, so let's, cross your fingers that this works. And before I begin, I just want to give a huge kudos and shout out to the previous presenters, Katie, Patrick, Ruth, and Deb. I feel very inferior in this room, and I'm very happy to be able to represent the Rust Foundation. But wow, talk about a wealth of knowledge, all jam-packed in the last hour and 15 minutes. So again, Rachel, thanks for having me and including me with this huge group of amazing stewards of open source. Okay, so I'm going to try and share my screen and make sure everything works out. Y'all cross those fingers for me. Sweet. I hope you can see everything. Are we good? Wait, how do
You should be good. I can see your slides, and you're in a little circle down the bottom.
Perfect.
And you are showing on YouTube, so you should be good to go.
Excellent. Of course, it would have to be me. Okay, so supporting the humans behind the code. So a lot of things that we heard today are about how the foundations can work internally. And now I want to talk about how we can work with the actual people that the foundation supports. So the people in the project. This is me and my daughter. I always like to include an intro slide with my kiddo with me. I live in Wilmington, North Carolina. So this was a few days before Christmas. And yes, we had beautiful, 50, 60 degree weather. And while it's sunny outside, it is also cold. So I am the Director of Outreach for the Rust Foundation. I'm a CNCF ambassador. I got my start in open source at the CDF, the Continuous Delivery Foundation. I've done things with OpenSSF. So I've kind of been all around Linux foundations and the Rust Foundation. And I've always been on sort of the people side of things. I'm not a coder. I do love developers though. So again, about the language. So there is Rust language and the Rust Foundation. Sometimes that gets a little conflated, but we are two separate entities, and the foundation supports the language. And it, as you can read there, it's super fast. It's known for its memory safety, its memory efficiency. It has been listed as the safest language to write in. And basically, it is a place where there has been lots of innovation. It had its 10-year anniversary last year, and we are super excited to see what is happening with the language and how it's moving forward. The foundation is this independent nonprofit organization, as Rachel said, and what we really want to do is invest strategically in the project, host virtual and in-person events, just like Deb was talking about. We do training. We are here to promote Rust and its adoption. We want to collaborate and help build out the technical infrastructure of the project. But let's talk about the people. So Rust is one of the best loved and fastest growing programming languages in the world. And I've underlined best loved and fastest growing. So those are two things that are very important to this talk I'm giving today. And our goal is to make Rust as safe, secure, and sustainable as it can possibly be. But we can't do that without the people building Rust. So when I say it's growing, so Rust, again, is popularly described as the solution to security issues because of its memory safety. A few years ago, policymakers really cited Rust as the language that they wanted people to use moving forward because of this. It is now everywhere. You can see it in automotive, in aerospace, in robotics, in AI. I mean, people are using Rust to build their infrastructure, and it's awesome in cloud native projects as well. Again, it's been cited as like the most loved language, and we have a huge increase in Rust developers in the last 3 years with increases in Europe and in China. So how does the foundation keep project maintainers and contributors, which again, as everyone has stated, are volunteers, healthy and happy while Rust is scaling in growth and adoption? So the privilege and sometimes the pains of being a foundation is, we're responsible for keeping the wheels on the bus in both infrastructure and core engineering terms, right? So that stuff is where we hire engineers and they just make sure that the lights can turn on and you can go build and do your thing. We are responsible for compliance and multi-jurisdictional laws and regulations. This is the stuff, again, that kind of Katie was talking about, making sure that we're in compliance and that we are following policies as they're written and that we are improving things. As Ruth pointed out, we have the CRA coming up, which, if you're not thinking about it now, I really hope you are. I hope she really ingrained that in your brain to make sure that we're 8 months minus 2 days away from things starting to move. So get on it. But here's the tricky part, right? We are responsible for ensuring the health and well-being and empowerment of the maintainer community, but we're also responsible for ensuring that there continues to be a language to steward. So they kind of interweave between the both, right? So you've got growth and adoption, and then you've got maintainers with burnout, but you've got lots of industries pulling and wanting special things made. They have feature requests, but then you have people just trying to do regular maintenance to move things forward. So it is what we like to call tricky. So the project has current initiatives, right, which is like maintenance. The Rust project has a thing called project goals, which if you haven't checked that out, I highly recommend you join the Zulip channel and see what kind of goals are being put forth. And this kind of sets what certain people in the project are working on throughout the year, which is really cool to see it work in real time. But we also have additional initiatives, and Deb talked a bit about like non-earmarked money, and some of these things are earmarked, right? We get money specifically to work on our C++ interop initiative. We get money specifically to work on security, but we do not have money to work on other things like Rust Safety Critical Consortium, Rust for C Python, Rust for Linux. These are other initiatives that other languages, which is so cool, are bringing into our organization, as well as industry trying to lead the way. Like when we think of the Rust Safety Critical Consortium, there's a lot of compliance things that they have to work on when they are adopting Rust. So the to-do list continually gets longer. And again, the first two things are, maintenance. You just have to maintain the project to, again, make sure there's still a language to exist for us to keep maintainers happy and healthy. So it's that circle right there. So it is a balancing act. And on one side, we have the Rust project and the developers and engineers that are working in the language to make it what it is today and see the innovations and improve it. And then you have external pressures from industry, from, again, the whole idea of job losses that have happened. So internal pressure and external pressures like asking for features and not understanding why things aren't moving as quickly as maybe people would hope that it would move. So as a foundation, our job is to identify opportunities to help support the humans that are building and maintaining our language. And one of the things the Rust Foundation did was they hired me, which has been amazing. Thank you for that. But they went ahead and hired a director of outreach. But I also like to say that I'm a director of inreach. So as much as I'm talking to you today, I spent my first month and a half or 2 months talking directly to the project. It was amazing. First of all, it was amazing for the foundation to give me the time to try and create relationships and build relationships and connect me with the people that are in the project doing the work. And I don't just mean from the leadership standpoint. I mean, I've talked to people all over the project, people that have been in there for a long time, people that are just new to the project, again, people in leadership, but it's really important for the foundation to build those connections within the community that they support. Without those relationships, we could say we're going to turn right, and the project's like, no, we want to turn left. And if you can't figure out how to meet in the middle, things can go kind of sour. So my job is to really just sort of communicate back and forth from the project to the foundation about what's going on, how we can work together, and how can we collaborate to have us all, again, keep a language sustainable and keep the maintainers happy and healthy. So it's a beautiful little cycle that we've got going on. And I'm really happy to be a part of the foundation and in this role specifically. So what else are we doing? We're showing up in the project. So the project has a Zulip channel. This channel is amazing. This has all of the technical stuff that you could ever want. It has meeting minutes. It's got dates. Every channel is like a topic. There are team levels. There are sub-team levels. And because it's open source, 98% of this, I would say, is all out in the open. There are some private channels to do some like work that maybe needs some less noise, or they're trying to figure stuff out. But the majority of all the channels are public. And here's a little snippet of Gracie Gregory. She is our marketing and comms director, like letting people know we had a call for program committee members, right? So when Deb was talking about PyCon and running that, we run RustConf, and we wanted to make sure that we had members of the project going through and sitting on the committee with us so that we could have a really good conference, and we'll have a really good conference in September. Also, we have private channels, like I said, and one of them is with our leadership council. So it helps them like kind of preview what we're trying to send out. It helps us refine our messaging to make sure we're on target. It's a great way for async communication because, as always, we're global and we need to like kind of get things done back and forth in a timely and efficient manner. But this has been exceptional in terms of making sure that the foundation is aligned with the project goals, and that when we are speaking to the public, or when we're speaking to the public in the project, that we are talking in a way that best serves them, right? Like, is it a corporate voice, or is it a community voice? Is it this? Is it that? And what's really cool is if you go through some of the Zulip threads that are public, you can see how they're really helping inform us and how we work together. And it's been amazing. So another thing we like to do is we like to attend project meetings. I know you're thinking, oh, another meeting on my calendar, but you have to show up. You have to be where the work is happening to know what's going on. So from a foundation side, we have our board of directors and we have project directors that are elected from the leadership council of the project, and they report back. And then we have our board members. So our meetings are closed to just members of the board. But the Rust project has a leadership council meeting that is open. They've got their team representatives that are elected. They have project directors sit on it. They're open for observers. And as a foundation staff member, I'm allowed to attend, which is great because you get to see how the sausage is made. You really get to see the discussions and the conversations that are happening at this level to let you know and really inform you the who's who in the project, what's trying to move forward. This helps you identify if there are blockers that perhaps from a foundation standpoint you can take away. It's that whole networking and making sure, again, that there's alignment in how things are moving forward. Rust is a consensus-based language, and that's how their leadership style is. So it's really fascinating to see how people from different walks of life all have come together under the Rust language flag and how they are moving things forward in their decision-making process. The next thing that I really recommend from the foundation side is to join an actual project team. So the Rust project has a vision team, and this team is amazing. They, I think, conducted 71 interviews last year that were about Rust from a bunch of different subsets of people and organizations and companies. And then they put together their vision doc and all of this stuff. So Ernest, who is a part of the foundation, is a part of this vision team. And what he does is he brought his network to the vision team. He works with a bunch of developers that are outside of the project. He works with a bunch of community members outside of the project, and he brought them into the project to participate. So I'm also a part of the vision team, but very high level, and a part of the content team. And just like with any contribution you make to open source, you find the teams within the project that make the most sense to you. As a former marketing person, I love the content team because I love to see what they're coming up with and how, from a foundation standpoint, not only can we amplify what they're doing, but like, how can I take my past expertise and add it into the project as well? So contributors come from all walks of life. And again, from a foundation standpoint, if your staff can be a part of the project in this kind of level, I think that's is a great way to go. Also, we help provide financial assistance to the project. So the project itself has its own project priorities budget. And so this is money allocated directly to the project for them to spend however they see fit. So the Leadership Council, there's a whole RFC process, but they determine how this budget is allocated. And our job as a foundation is just to advise and then implement the budget spend. So last year, we were very happy that the project donated over $100,000 in travel grants. So Rust project members could attend conferences around the world, and they're all hands that's in the Netherlands. They had a fellows and community grants program, so they could pay maintainers and contributors to work on specific things that they proposed. They contracted a program manager who is phenomenal. That the project, again, when we talk about identifying opportunities, the project realized as it's growing and as it's scaling, they needed someone in there to help manage sort of the day-to-day operations and to keep everyone in check and to really not tell people what to do, but just to have a nice recording of what's being done and following things up. So Tomasz, he's amazing, and he's their program manager. And then they also contracted a compiler ops maintainer, because a compiler, if you know anything about Rust, is a place to be. It is where all the magic happens, not all the magic, but a lot of it. And they realized that they needed to fund this work to get things done. And so they're actually continuing both contracts for 2026. And they've opened up another contract for another program manager this year, because they realized the benefit to the ecosystem is huge when you have someone that can help coordinate cross teams and make sure projects move forward. Currently, when we also talk about money, we are in the process of designing the Rust Foundation Maintainers Fund, where the Leadership Council has delegated a subcommittee. I sit on the subcommittee, and we are working through ways to design how, when the Rust Foundation Maintainers Fund has a pool of money, how those monies are going to be distributed. So we're trying to be very transparent and very clear with how this works. And there's tons of project feedback. Again, it's got its own Zulip channel, and it's been really invigorating to see how this works. Now, like with anything, working from a corporate level, things move fast. Working from a consensus-driven project level, things are a little bit slower. But it's the thought and the passion behind everything that goes into it, which you understand that it's not slow because there's not work being done. It's slow because it's thoughtful. And that's a really big thing. We also support the project by making public statements and actions. So we signed a joint statement on, oh my goodness, I'm sorry, on open source infrastructure stewardship. Sorry, my little face was blocking my screen. And so did Deb with Python, which is great. And that, again, is trying to figure out a way to, open source isn't free. How can we, as foundations, figure out a way to have people, quote, pay their fair share in using what they're doing? And so we're going to be holding meetings about this and trying to see how we can move this initiative forward. And I've already talked on this a little bit, the Rust Foundation Maintainers Fund, right? Like trying to let the public know that there are people working in Rust that need their support so they continue moving forward. And we would be the vessel from which you could make your donations. And then the project, as I said, are working on ways to distribute those funds. So just to sum up everything, you know, collaboration really is key. And I am, again, very fortunate to have the position that I have. But as you see, it's not just me. It's staff at the foundation really dedicated to communicating and working with the project and external stakeholders to kind of be that throughput from the project to external, but also, again, building those relationships and making sure that the project voice is heard in what we are doing. So we are communicating directly with the project. You want to join those project-led initiatives and teams. Attend leadership meetings or project meetings when you can, because they are so insightful, and it's really a way to see how the sausage is made, how things are coming together. We provide financial ownership to the project. So it's not just that we are, again, using the funds on certain things that are earmarked, is that they have their own budget and their own ownership to be able to give them the power to move that money in a way that they know is going to move the project forward. And of course, we have awareness campaigns and show lots of public support for the project. I'm available to be asked any question. And other than that, I just want to say thank you. And thank you again to Rachel, and sitting here at home, but being on a panel with my fellow panelists, or whatever this is called, this group experience has been amazing. And I highly recommend you check out every single foundation that was represented today, because there is definitely a place for you in a maintainer contributor type role, as well as funding, which we could all use a little extra money here and there.
Thank you so much. It's so great to see. I agree with you. Everyone's amazing, including you. And it's amazing to see the inner workings of the foundations and the cogs, and also to see, where there are similarities and where there are differences. So I hope this has been educational to people. I hope this has been something that people ignites people to do something, to at least share with people, to start to tell the story a little bit about the role of foundations. I mean, I know it's out there, but the role of foundations, what they're going through, an update in 2026. And this is but 5 foundations of very many that make it work. And I think it's all of the different voices, some of which we had here, that make open source work. And so I appreciate everyone's time. I appreciate all the attendees. And that is it. So thank you so much, Lori.
Thank you.